The house was calm, just like I always dreamed it would be. Without alarms, without express mail, without the buzz of constant encrypted calls from the background, only the birds singing, sneaking through the open window of the kitchen and the rhythmic clinking of my teaspoon against a ceramic cup, slightly broken. Retirement, like I imagined it, should have soft edges, like a hug that doesn't squeeze. I had one. 30 years in federal cybersecurity, almost all behind closed doors, glass, and classified authorizations, had left their mark on my back, in my dreams, and in a deeper place that I no longer tried to name. It had been a long time since I had made peace with the loneliness, but there are silences that weigh more than others. I hadn't heard from Alejandra in more than a week. The last time I saw her, she was standing in this same kitchen with her arms crossed, voice tense, wondering if I could help her with the rent. Only this time, I didn't ask why she needed it. I wrote her a check and saw her leave without looking me in the eyes. That's how it was, our new ritual, requests without warmth, answers without questions. I told myself I was busy, that she had pressures growing up with a mother who never failed to detect a cyber attack, but forgot every school recital. Maybe I taught her to keep her distance. I never questioned her coldness out loud. I was too afraid of the answer. It was a Tuesday when I found the envelope without a sender, just my name written in hard, precise letters. The postmark was local to Querétaro. Inside, a folded notification from a private financial institution I had never heard of, directed at a trust account in my name. The details were clear. I never opened that account. I sat down at the dining room table with firm hands, scanning each line with my eyes. Payments. Terms of a loan. A registered confirmant. Alejandra's name was there, hiding between the legal language I knew too well. I didn't make any noise, I didn't call anyone. I just stood there, letting the sun set, the morning advance across the ground, heating everything except the center of my chest. Something had changed, not only in the facts I had just discovered, but in the space that separated us. And suddenly, I knew that this silence was not peace. It was the kind of calm that comes before a storm. The second envelope was thicker. It arrived 3 days after the first. The same white, simple envelope, the same cold precision in the letters. I already knew it wasn't a mistake. Those who steal from you don't send flowers, they send papers. Inside was a formal notification. Letterhead. Petition filed. Plaintiff, Alejandra Morales. Accusations, misuse of family property, psychological instability, request for full control over shared properties and accounts. I read the document twice before allowing myself to sit down. I didn't cry. I think that part of me went out a long time ago. But my hands trembled as I put the pages back in the envelope. It wasn't fear. It was the overwhelming weight of how well she had planned everything. This wasn't impulsive. It was coordinated, rehearsed, signed, and sealed. At the bottom was her lawyer's number, someone from an elegant office in Polanco, specialized in resolving complex family conflicts. I had heard of them once, in a case where an elderly father lost control of his patrimony to a son who hadn't spoken to him for years. I spent the next hour walking from room to room in my house, the place I built after years of renting, moving, sacrifice. Every switch and hinge kept a memory. Alejandra's first bike leaned on the porch for a whole summer before I let her use it. Her drawings still lived in a box upstairs. The same daughter who once begged me to braid her hair before school now wanted a judge to declare me incapable. The date of the hearing was set in black, clear ink, 3 weeks from now. The news spread quickly. I didn't tell anyone, but somehow people began to know. Mrs. Vargas, from the house across the street, stopped greeting me when she was watering her garden. A man in the supermarket, someone I worked with early in my career, averted his gaze when we crossed paths. The silence around me took a new form, suspicion. I didn't go on social media. I didn't respond to the email Alejandra sent me later, brief and dry. It's not personal, Mom. I just want to make sure you're okay. Instead, I took out a yellow notebook and started to write down what I remembered. Dates, account names, documents I signed, those I didn't. I opened a private folder on my computer and started recording everything, because if this was going to be a war she brought to my door, I wasn't going to enter unarmed. I might have quit my government job, but I didn't forget how to track a pattern. I was trained to detect gaps, to map intentions behind coded language. And the language Alejandra used in that lawsuit, disguised as concern, wrapped in supposed filial duty, was something I recognized. It was not concern, it was a strategy. And strategies always leave a trace. I started with the documents I had: account statements, old tax returns, mortgage records, everything I had carefully filed away for years, thinking only the tax authority or my accountant would care. Now they were the only thing I had. I spread them out on the kitchen table in orderly rows, touching each one as if it could reveal a truth that escaped me the first time. My house had been refinanced. That was clear. The transaction was recorded 2 months ago under a shell company called La Loma Civic Group. The signature on the authorization form had my name, but not my handwriting. An almost perfect imitation, good enough to fool a loan processor, but not someone who spent 3 decades detecting irregularities in classified documents. I looked at it for a long time. Whoever forged it knew how to make my loops and curve my letters. It was practiced. I consulted the state's public business record. La Loma Civic Group had no office or website, just a P.O. box in Morelia and 2 registered executives, one anonymous, the other Alejandra, hidden under a slightly altered legal name, Morales Guzman, a surname I didn't recognize. That night, I called in a favor. Ramon Torres owed me one. We had worked together in cyber defense rotations in the early days, intercepting phishing campaigns and mapping state-sponsored ransomware attacks. He answered on the first ring. I need a discrete trace, I said. No reports, just a map. He didn't ask why, he just told me he'd send what he had. In one day, I had access logs, IP routes, metadata. What I found uncovered something much worse than I imagined. There had been multiple requests for subsidies in my name, federal programs to help veterans, housing assistance, even a transition fund for wounded officers. Each one was linked to the same fingerprint, routed through a VPN, but sloppy enough for Ramon to locate the source. It came from Alejandra's apartment. Not only had she moved money, she had impersonated me. She used my military ID number, uploaded copies of my discharge documents, papers I hadn't even given her. Somehow, she accessed records I assumed were protected by at least 2 layers of encryption. That was what hurt the most, not that she lied, but that she did it so easily. She knew where to look. I printed everything: screenshots, timestamps, metadata reports. I cross-referenced dates and amounts, recorded the connections in a digital spreadsheet, and saved the files on 2 encrypted USB drives. One went to a safe deposit box downtown. I put the other in a fireproof safe, bolted to the floor of my closet. Before closing it, I added one more thing: a handwritten letter, just a few lines. If something happens to me, this is not paranoia, it's proof. Read it all. I folded it carefully and placed it on top of the drive. Then I closed the door and turned the dial. My hand lingered for a moment on the cold steel before turning away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed by the window, watching the porch light cast long shadows across the courtyard. I thought about the years I spent teaching Alejandra how to stay safe online, how to make unique passwords, how to verify a link before clicking. I never imagined I'd need to teach her not to become the threat. But at some point, she learned all the wrong lessons, and I was starting to understand how far she was willing to go. I prepared dinner as she liked it before: pan-seared salmon, roasted carrots with a touch of honey, and jasmine rice. I even set the table with the linen napkins she chose from a discount store when she was 12, proud of her good eye for colors. I hadn't used them in years. They still smelled faintly of lemon detergent and thyme. Alejandra arrived that afternoon, dressed in neutral tones that made her look older or colder. She looked around the room as if she were appraising a property, not visiting her mother. We exchanged brief greetings while I served the food. She barely touched her plate. I waited until we finished. Then I placed a single printed sheet on the table between us. "Do you recognize this?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. She didn't flinch. She just lowered her gaze to the document, the mortgage refinancing form with my name and a signature that wasn't mine. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. She leaned back in her chair. "Always so dramatic," she said. "It's just a house, Mom. Do you live in it?" "No, that's not the question," I replied. She rolled her eyes. "You were always busy saving the world to be a mother. Now you act surprised that I saw what's happening under your own roof." Her words hit like a slap, not loud, but deep. Still, I stood firm. "Was any of it real?" I asked in a low voice. "The nights we read together, your drawings on the fridge, the way you took my hand when crossing the street, was any of that real?" She didn't answer. She just took her bag, stood up, and looked toward the hallway as if she couldn't get out fast enough. "It's not personal," she muttered. "You just made it impossible to do things the right way." And she left. The door closed with a soft click, but the silence that followed was brutal. I stayed there for a long time after the food cooled, looking at the empty chair. I didn't get angry, I didn't break anything. I just let it all rise uninvited from a place I thought had dried up long ago. Tears came slowly, steadily, not from anger, but from mourning, a silent mourning for a daughter I no longer recognized. And when the tears passed, I knew what I had to do. I dressed in black, not for mourning, not for theatrics, just black. Clean lines, ironed fabric, shoes I hadn't worn since a funeral 3 years ago. I walked alone through the courthouse entrance. No one looked me in the eye. I saw my neighbor from 2 houses away, Mrs. Mendoza, near the security checkpoint. She used to bring me gingerbread at Christmas. Today, she looked away as if I wasn't there. Alejandra was outside, near the stairs, flanked by her lawyer and a young man with a camera around his neck. She smiled and even laughed, as if this were a press event. Her hair was curly, her coat expensive, and she spoke with that false warmth she used like perfume. Her lawyer whispered something to her, and she nodded. Her eyes wandered toward the entrance as I passed by. I didn't slow down. Inside, the courthouse smelled like paper dust and waiting. I took a seat quietly near the front. The judge entered with the usual formality, but everything that followed felt unreal. I sat still, with my hands crossed in my lap, while my own daughter tried to erase me. Alejandra's lawyer was polished and sharp. He called me controlling, emotionally unstable, paranoid. He cited the distance between us as proof of instability, read text messages out of context, played cut voice recordings just before the explanation. They painted me as a former federal employee, once respected, now crumbling, too fragile to manage her own affairs. Alejandra played her part well. She looked down at the right moments, dried her eyes without ruining her eyeliner. She told the judge she feared for my safety, that she was only doing this to protect her mother from herself. She called it an act of love. I said nothing. I let it all fall, word after word, lie after lie. I watched them build a case with distortions, and I let them, because I wasn't there to argue, I was there to finish it. When the judge asked if I wanted to respond, I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, with a calm but firm voice, "before a decision is made, I ask that this be read." I stepped forward and placed a single sheet on the stand. A sheet without speeches, no emotions, just a document that had been waiting in silence, like me. The judge adjusted his glasses, took the paper, and began to read. I stepped back, crossing my hands again, and when his expression changed, I knew we had reached the moment I had prepared for. The judge's eyes stopped at the second paragraph. His brow furrowed. By the third, he stopped reading aloud. He scanned the rest silently, his lips tight, his gaze hard. I could feel the change in the room, the silent edge of held breaths, postures that grew tense, confidence that wavered. He set the paper down carefully. Then he looked at the bailiff and said, "Close the room. Nobody's leaving. Call the federal sheriff's office." A wave of confusion swept through the courthouse. The bailiff hesitated, looking at the judge as if seeking confirmation. He received it with a firm nod. The doors closed with a solid, resonant click. The bolts slid into place. Alejandra straightened in her seat, alarm flashing across her face like a storm cloud. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering fast and low. She turned to me, looking for something, maybe a sign of relief or a respite. I didn't give her anything. The agents entered silently, with purpose. 3 of them, all in plain jackets and that presence that doesn't need a badge to register. One approached the judge, whispering something in his ear. Another went to the plaintiff's table. Alejandra's hands were now shaking. "What is this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "This is crazy." The agent didn't reply, pulling an order from his pocket and placing it on the table. "Alejandra Morales, you are in custody on federal charges of financial fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized use of federal military aid systems." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but another agent stepped in. Then a name was mentioned, Javier Guzman, another man in the gallery, sitting silently 2 rows back. He stood up suddenly. I hadn't seen him come in. I didn't look at Alejandra as the agents surrounded her, read her rights, and took her away. Everything moved quickly after that. The court clerk collected documents. The judge signed a sealed order, and the agents disappeared down the hall with both of them in custody. I sat, watching without blinking, hands crossed in my lap, as the lies dissolved like thread in a flame. The judge looked at me once the courtroom calmed down again. His eyes held no pity, just a recognition I hadn't expected. He nodded briefly. "You've done something difficult," he said softly, "and the right thing." I nodded once in response. The affidavit he read, the one I placed on his stand, had been filed 3 days earlier with the Department of Justice. It detailed all the forged documents, the stolen identities, the laundered veteran subsidies. My name was clear not as an accused in the end, but as a whistleblower. While the judge gave instructions to reconvene for procedural reasons, I stood. The room felt smaller now, not because I had diminished, but because the weight I had been carrying had finally lifted. I returned home the same way I arrived, alone. The sky had that faded gray that comes after a storm, not clear enough to comfort, not dark enough to match the weight I carried. I opened the door, stepped inside, and let the silence settle around me like a coat I couldn't take off. By nightfall, the news had spread. A headline flashed on my phone screen: "Veteran turns over daughter for fraud, triggers federal arrests in courtroom confrontation." Some stories called me brave, others cold. I didn't read beyond the first lines. The neighbors came by the next day, slower than usual. Some stared too long, others averted their eyes completely. No one said hello, no one knocked on my door. I expected they would. The idea of explaining myself seemed absurd. They hadn't seen the silent years that led to that moment. They hadn't heard her say, "You were too busy saving the world," as if it were a curse. They only saw a snapshot and a woman in black who didn't flinch as her daughter was taken away. I stayed off the internet, didn't answer calls, set the table, and let it cool. 3 days later, I drove to the storage unit I hadn't opened in years. It used to be a space for file backups I couldn't keep at home, a habit from my work days. Now it was mostly dust and forgotten boxes. The folder was where I left it, locked in a steel cabinet behind some old file boxes. I opened it without hesitation. Inside, among evidence records and copies of statements, was the drawing I found years ago when I moved. Crayons on printer paper. A stick figure version of me with a big smile and messy red hair, holding hands with another smaller figure labeled me. Above, written in crooked letters, "I love you, Mom. Alejandra, 7 years old." I looked at it for a long time. I didn't cry. The grief I needed to process had already been done. I folded the paper carefully, without creasing it, and slid it back into the folder. Then I closed the cabinet, locked it, and stepped into the still air of the storage unit. There was one more thing I needed to do. The money no longer mattered as it once might have. A portion of the recovered assets went directly to a nonprofit that supported defrauded or deceived veterans. No press, no plaque, just a silent transfer and a handwritten note to the director for those who didn't see it coming. I started volunteering a few weeks later, mornings in a shared office, teaching older veterans how to recognize phishing attempts, detect loan scams, and protect their identities. I showed them what to look for in a signature, how to track strange activity in an account. Most listened attentively. Some took it as a joke, but others could tell they had already been burned. And maybe, just maybe, listening to someone who had gone through it too made them feel a little less foolish. At night, I'd go by the courthouse sometimes. I never stopped, I never sat on the steps, just walked slowly with a steady stride. People assumed I avoided it, that I'd never want to be near that place again. But the truth is, I didn't hate the courthouse. I respected it. It was where I reclaimed something that had been quietly stripped away for years. My name, my history, my voice. The truth doesn't shout, doesn't force its way through. It waits, gathers weight over time, and when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to raise its voice. It's just there, undeniable. I walked past the stone columns and kept going, not doing anything grand, just moving forward. The wind moved through the trees lining the street, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like liberation. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew the weight I had carried was no longer mine. Some say I was cruel, others call me brave. But no one was there when I opened the envelope or when I sat across from my daughter as she lied to their faces. They didn't feel the silence between us harden into something permanent. I didn't choose to fight because I wanted to. I fought because someone had to remember what was true. And maybe I'll always be the villain in someone else's version. That's okay, because the truth doesn't need to be liked. It just needs someone willing to hold it and stand firm when everything costs.